a number of opening speakers for you for the discussion, and then we'll have a general discussion with the many different people who are on the Zoom line. So with that, Helga Zepp-LaRouche, please go ahead and open us up. She's the founder of the Schiller Institute and the initiator of the International Peace Coalition. Thank you.
Well, let me first say hello to all of you. A couple of months ago, I had dared the opinion that we would enter the most dangerous 6 months in the history of mankind. And unfortunately, I'm not in a position to correct that view. As a matter of fact, there are many signs that major developments will occur before the US election on November 5th. Now, as Anastasia just said, with the assassination of the leader of Hamas, Sinwar, we are clearly in a situation where, the escalation is looming. Kamala Harris said now is the time to end it, but, obviously that is not what Netanyahu intends. And CNN already a couple of days ago reported that the Israeli army is ready for an attack on Iran at any moment. Now, it could be that such an attack takes place. It could be a conventional attack only, in quote, on oil refineries and such targets. It could also be an attempt to knock out the nuclear facilities, which obviously, given the fact that they are deeply hidden in the mountains, would, require probably nuclear weapons. And therefore, the Deputy Foreign Minister Ryabkov of Russia has warned very sharply, sharp warning to Israel that if they would happen, if they would do that, it would lead to a absolutely horrible catastrophe in the region and possibly beyond. Now, the situation on the ground remains one of, beyond description. Ethnic cleansing is continuing. Israel has announced that they will declare about 400,000 people living in the north of Gaza as combatants, and that they, can only leave or, face starvation. If this is not a case of clear ethnic cleansing, I don't know what you call it, but the even larger danger naturally is a pending strike into Iran. Now, already in 2016, Russia had delivered the S-300 air defense system to Iran, and the Times of India was reporting end of August that Russia also has delivered some Iskander missiles to Iran. These are nuclear-capable missiles, and also the Murmansk BNK system, which is a system which can suppress satellite navigation and communication at a range of about 300 to 500 miles. Now, the Iskander system can also include R-500 or 9M729 ground launch missiles, which have a range of 1,550 miles and are also nuclear capable. But the crucial point about all of this is that they need Russian specialists to operate them, both the Iskander and the Murmansk system. And also, more recently, Russia has supplied Iran with S-400 defense systems. So there are, in all likelihood, Russian specialists in Iran helping Iran with these systems, while on the other side, the United States has delivered recently the THAAD air defense system to Israel, and it is reported that there are about 100 US troops there. And these THAAD air defense systems will clearly be a target for Iran if this scenario unfolds. and Russia has to supply Iran with the targeting info needed to hit these US-operated THAAD missiles. So that means we are not only looking at a possible Israeli strike against Iran, but we are looking at a direct confrontation between US and Russian military over the situation. And you can easily imagine, that this has the potential to completely go out of control, especially, because the recent Russian-Iranian security arrangement, which has been agreed upon, is supposed to be signed at the upcoming Kazan BRICS meeting. And obviously, if that goes into effect, then you have a full-fledged Russian-Iranian, response. And remember that President Putin only a few months ago was in North Korea to make a strategic agreement between Russia and North Korea, and then you have the very close cooperation between Russia and China. So we are really looking into the eye of escalation to World War III. Now, unfortunately, the situation in Ukraine is not much better, because there, while the situation on the battleground in Ukraine is becoming more desperate by the hour, and it's very clear that there is no chance in the world that Ukraine could win against Russia, what many people have been saying for a long time. But Zelensky was on a tour in Europe right now, including Berlin and other places, demanding or proposing his so-called victory plan, which is not a victory plan at all, because all he demanded was that Ukraine should immediately be allowed into NATO, and that Ukraine will insist on having nuclear weapons if that is denied. Now, that is obviously a direct plan to World War III, because both these conditions, nuclear arms in Ukraine, Ukraine being part of NATO, is the absolute red line. And that's the real reason why this whole conflict erupted in the first place, that basically for Russia, it is not acceptable to have offensive systems so closely at their border. And for Zelensky to repeat that just, means he has no concern for reality at all. And this is why one of the leaders of the Duma, Leonid Slutsky, basically characterized that plan as an attempt to pull the West into World War III. Now, unfortunately, in Germany, where Scholz still says no, he will not deliver the Taurus. Otherwise, Germany will be, second to the United States, the largest supplier of weapons to Ukraine. But Scholz said, no, the Taurus system we still not deliver. He will stick to that. But then Merz, Friedrich Merz, who is the opposition leader and probable chancellor candidate of the opposition, he basically on Wednesday in a Bundestag debate was talking, he said, oh, we should give Putin a 24-hour ultimatum that he is basically stopping to attack the Ukrainian population, or we should destroy the supply lines over which the weapons come, killing the Ukrainian population. And, we should supply Ukraine with the Taurus missile. Now, you probably remember that only a few months ago, there was this big scandal about a tape being somehow released where 3 Bundeswehr officers were debating how the Taurus system can only be operated by experts of the Bundeswehr. So what Merz is actually proposing is, to use German Taurus missiles for an attack on Russia, a nuclear power, which is, somebody who makes such a proposal is obviously completely separated from any reality. And I think if one would consult a psychologist, they would easily agree that the definition of insanity is if people are completely separated from reality. Now, the real reason why this is coming to a head is not just in the timetable, US election, the general condition on the battlefield, but obviously, the financial system of the transatlantic world is in terrible shape, and they want to prevent by all means the emergence of a new system, but that is exactly what is happening. The former deputy head of the New Development Bank, Paulo Nogueira Batista, just again in an interview said that the IMF is unreformable. And I think the unwillingness of forces in the West to write off an unpayable debt would confirm such an estimate. And therefore, Batista is insisting that a new international financial architecture is needed, a new reserve currency. And in the preparatory meetings before the BRICS summit, it became clear that within the BRICS group, not everybody is on the same page. It seems that India is not going in the direction of such a new reserve currency. And this is why Batista proposed that a subgroup of the BRICS should work on such a proposal. And he said, which I think is absolutely true, that the countries of the global south would be absolutely disappointed if out of the Kazan meeting nothing concrete would come out and just nice words. Now, there is one other development which I think is more hopeful, and that is that Sun Xiaobo, the Director General of the Department of Arms Control of the Chinese Foreign Ministry, has written in an article in Global Times that a new security architecture is needed. And I think this is the closest to what I have heard to the proposal we have been pushing here for a new security and development architecture, which must take into account the interests of all nations of the world. So what Sun Xiaobo says is we absolutely have to aim to have a world free of nuclear weapons. And I think that is so absolutely urgent, because if we are the intelligent species on the planet and we cannot eliminate a weapon system which threatens our extinction, then we fail that characterization for sure to be the creative species. So he says that the existing security structures are not adequate to prevent nuclear war, which is clear if you look at the malfunction of the UN Security Council because of the veto power of the 5 permanent countries. No conclusion has been reached for a very long time. And therefore, he calls for a paradigm shift, an inclusive and cooperative security framework, which gives attention to the legitimate concerns of all nations. And he calls for all nations to start to discuss a sustainable security concept, which should be started with concrete steps and which must go beyond a Cold War thinking. Now, I think that is the absolute necessary answer to a twofold nuclear war danger coming out of 2 regional crises, which can go out of control at any moment. And therefore, I want to reiterate my repeated call on all the participants of this meeting that we have to find a way of catapulting this debate on the need for a new security and development architecture in the tradition of the Peace of Westphalia on the international agenda, because I think that is the only way how we will get out of this twofold crisis. So let's discuss this, I hope.
Thank you very much, Helga, for this stark picture that you painted. I think it's important that we have our next speaker, Mossi Raz, Mr. Mossi Raz, who is a former member of the Knesset and former director of General for Peace now, and former IDF paratrooper. So thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Mossi Raz from Israel. Please go ahead.
Hi, good evening for us, good morning for you. And thank you for the invitation. I'm sorry that I will have to leave early, but not that early. I've heard all the things of Mrs. LaRouche, and of course I agree with many of them. I want to say how I see that from my side as a peace activist in Israel. I just came back from Brussels. We had in the European Parliament a session that was initiated by the S&P, Social and Democrats group in the Parliament, with Mr. Borrell, the foreign minister, with Ms. Perez, the head of the faction in the parliament, with Mr. Nasser Al-Kidwa, who was for many years the Palestinian ambassador to UN and was not that many years foreign minister of Palestine, and me. And I think that more or less all of us said the same things, with very small differences between us that I think can represent many Israelis and many Palestinians. I'm not sure most of them, but at least many of them. We did not talk about Ukraine, we talk about our conflict. Yes, I see that there are escalations, even in Europe. The fact that North Korea decided to send troops to fight against Ukraine is not helping. And here in the aftermath of the October 7 terrorist attack of Hamas on Israel and October 8 terrorist attack of Hezbollah on Israel, and other attacks initiated by the Iranians from Iraq, from Syria, from Yemen. Today an attack came from Jordan, but I'm not sure if the people who attacked are Jordanians or Yemens. So we see this deterioration, and it's really clear that there is a conflict here that is not only between two partners. We see the fact that the Iranians are sending missiles to Russia in order to attack Ukraine. We see that Iranians are sending missiles to Hezbollah in Lebanon in order to attack Israel, and to the Houthis in Yemen, and to militia groups in Iraq and Syria in order to send to attack Israel. But by the way, not only Israel, they attacked Saudi Arabia and other states in the area, not only Israel, not now, not this year, but before, a few years ago. So this is a global, become global war that we must bring to an end. Israel did not respond yet to the Iranian attack on Israel on October 1st. I believe, I hope that, I think that Israel has done right, that did not respond, and maybe we should ask the government not to respond. I think that it's better not to respond to the Iranian attack, but we do remember that they attacked Israeli civilians on October 1st. The hundreds of houses were destroyed in this attack, not far even from the place that I speak to you now, in the center of Israel. I think that we all have to call to stop the war in Ukraine and in Gaza and in Lebanon. In our case here of Israel and Palestine, the way is pretty clear. As I said earlier, there are vast coalitions of Palestinians and Israelis who basically say the same things. We say, end the war, release the hostages, still 101 Israeli hostages, not only Israeli, by the way, from many states, I think 18 states, but most of them Israelis are in captivity in Gaza. The young of them is 1 year old. The older one is 86 years old. Among them, even two members in my party and many peace activists. So releasing the hostages, releasing agreed number of prisoners, ending the war, withdrawal from Gaza, and start going towards the idea of two states solution. I want to mention here that we should accept the Arab League peace initiative. I want to mention here the initiative of Mr. Al-Qidwa that I just mentioned, who was the Palestinian foreign minister, and Mr. Olmert, who was the Israeli prime minister, but actually proposed in the last week's peace plane. They met yesterday, the Pope, and I think got the support of the Pope. I fully support in these initiatives. I think it gives a lot of hope, and we should be hopeful. We should call again and again, ending the war, release the hostages and prisoners, and start moving towards peace agreements in Europe and in Israel, Palestine. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mossi Raz. Definitely something to really chew on here. I'm going to continue, and then we'll come back for a back and forth discussion. Let's go to Graham Fuller, who's a former U.S. diplomat and CIA official, a former CIA official, and an Islamic scholar. Thank you so much for joining us, Graham. Please go ahead. Graham, I think you're muted.
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Could we center your camera a little bit so we can see your
Yes.
wonderful face?
How is that?
Better. Thank you.
Okay. It's incredible to believe the speed and acceleration with which events are taking place, and not only in the Middle East, of course, but around the world in very disturbing ways that Helga has so often touched upon. Right now, I would say that Israel and its actions in Gaza and in Lebanon and in the broader Middle East has to be the key accelerator of these crisis events across the region. That Israel is not the only factor, of course, but it seems to have accelerated both American and other involvement. This has been complicated by what has essentially been Western inaction, stemming Western inaction, not only in the part of the U.S., which has been totally supportive of Israel and virtually everything it does by continuing to supply weapons, but even in Europe and in the EU, there are very few voices. Maybe they're starting to speak up, but few voices speaking out in moral indignation against what is happening. So we find the theater of combat is really expanding now, bringing in many new factors. Clearly, I think one of the most important of these factors is growing global outrage against Israel, even if we don't see it much in the West. encouraging, however, even in the US, we see increasing student action, student voices against events in the Middle East and against US continuing supply of weapons to Israel. And we see, even for the first time, I think, in American history, Middle Eastern events actually becoming mentioned now, part of the discussion and debate in presidential politics. I don't take this terribly seriously, but I think it's a very heartening start that even foreign policy events of this sort is now playing a small role in in American domestic politics. Also, we see in Europe now the cracking of total European support for Israeli policies. So there are a few encouraging signs that that events in the West and its blanket support for Israel is changing. But there is a new factor, which I think is also extremely important right now, and that is Lebanon. I would say that Lebanon and the Israeli invasion of Lebanon, it's not the first time by any means. It's happened many times in the past. But the present invasion of Israel into Lebanon represents a true watershed in the sense that in this war that Israel has been undertaking in Gaza, it was limited to Gaza essentially, or limited to the West Bank, but within territories that fundamentally mark what Israel claims as its territories. But Lebanon is the first real country, if you will, that has been attacked now by Israel, which changes the game quite sharply. We can see this particularly in how deeply upsetting this Israeli attack on Lebanon is in France. France has very deep cultural, political, long-time ties going back to even colonial era to Lebanon. It has close ties still with Lebanon. And this has caused, for the first time, Macron in France to speak up more sharply, and now I think for the second time in a row has banned Israeli participation in an arms marketplace in France. Similarly, we can see Germany and Norway growing increasingly uncomfortable with the events as they are now taking place in the Middle East. I think by now, NATO states are perhaps beginning to realize that they cannot follow the predictable U.S. line in support of the Israeli narrative about what is going on there. I think there is, between Israel and Gaza and Ukraine, there is growing suspicion and doubt about the wisdom of following the U.S. propaganda line, narrative, or even lies, if you will, about the course of events in Ukraine and certainly in Gaza. I think it is now very clear to even in Europe that it is no longer simply Israel seeking revenge for the terrible attack of Hamas on 7 October last year, but this has now gone way beyond any sense of seeking revenge and even beyond a destruction of Hamas, but into an excuse for the broader ethnic cleansing of Palestinians in the region and a desire for Israel to expand its influence in the region. It is rather shocking, and I find it almost unbelievable that Israel has allowed its very prominent finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, to speak openly and publicly in utterly uninhibited fashion about Israel's ultimate need to expand into territories which essentially were prophesied in the Bible and granted by God to a future Israel. And that includes land within Lebanon, within Syria, within Iraq, and even parts of possibly of Saudi Arabia that will ultimately fall under Israel control of a greater Israeli state. So it's one thing for people to be saying this in quiet, but for this to be said in public now suggests how far out of touch Israel is in expressing these views that cannot help its international image at all. Now, also one other, I think, significant series of developments is the growing cooperation among Middle Eastern states to work together now, both in the interest of peace, to bringing an end to the Gaza war, and to seeking to modify, to ameliorate among Middle Eastern states. So we have old rivalries, supposedly, of Saudi Arabia against Israel, and Turkey against Iran, and Iran against the whole Gulf area. These old hatreds that had been provoked and I would argue supported by the United States, the constant drumbeat of the need to militarize the Middle East against Iran, these things are now beginning to weaken, and we find serious discussions now among all these Middle Eastern states with each other that was unthinkable even 1 year ago, I would argue. So I'm very heartened by that. And then, as Helga mentioned, I think we have the very important context coming up of the meeting in Kazan of the BRICS movement, which Iran is now, of course, important member of it, and Turkey is seeking membership as the first NATO member, presumably, of the BRICS organization. Obviously, NATO is extremely unhappy with any mention of Turkey as a NATO member joining BRICS. But it's interesting that NATO, I think, is very timid about speaking out harshly against Turkey in this regard. Yes, some rhetoric, but the fundamental fact is NATO needs Turkey far more than Turkey needs NATO. Turkey now sees itself increasingly as
Die Türkei sieht sich selbst als...
Sorry, German, could you please go back to the German channel? Continue, Graham. We apologize.
Yeah, I'm almost done here, Anastasia. I'm sorry. I think as we look at the world now, we are seeing a major shift in orientation about global policies, global security structures, and Helga has spoken on many occasions about this. The basic fact is the geopolitical center of gravity in the world is now shifting away from a West that is increasingly unable to cope with the international challenges, and that is finding itself more and more isolated and living in an unreal world. And we see at the same time the rise of the global South that will play a greater role. This is not going to happen overnight, but it is happening, and it's happening in front of our very own eyes. We see more and more countries unwilling to buy into the US geopolitical and security vision of the world. Even Europe and NATO wondering about the wisdom of pursuing US policies, like following the Pied Piper into greater and greater disasters and catastrophe in Europe. So I as a former American, I'm not happy to see the US becoming weaker, so to speak, with less cards to play internationally. But I think without a sharp change in the nature of American policy and moving away from the idea of being the world's sole global superpower, America is damaging itself very deeply, economically and politically and diplomatically. So just to conclude, despite the real horrors of the war in the Middle East and Ukraine, there are encouraging signs now of major shifts in this kind of geopolitical thinking. It's never going to happen fast enough for what we would like to see, but we do see it happening, and I think it is accelerating in front of our eyes. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham Fuller, for that. And Helga, I wanted to see if you had a response. I know that Mossi Raz had to get going very soon, so please go ahead.
Well, I think this peace proposal you were talking about, Mr. Raz, which was discussed also with the Pope, I think it has its place, but my experience and worry is that it will not work, because if you don't change the underlying dynamic, which would basically mean an agreement to stop this Eretz Israel on the one side, and to basically really go into a direction like we have proposed with the economic development plan for the entire region, so that you put an incentive for everybody to basically put past wars and conflicts behind and move towards building together a future. I'm not certain that it will function, which is why I think we need really to look at the totality. I mean, look, what will be the result of the Lebanon crisis right now? There's already more than 1 million people have been, have become refugees. Many of them go to Syria, but some of them also go to Europe. And if you look at the European response to the refugee crisis, it just is absolutely putting into question the right for asylum, the Geneva Convention on Refugees, what Italy is now proposing with the hotspot in Albania is a nightmare. I mean, it's a concentration camp, and the EU wants to make that the model for all countries, that they put up such hotspots and that way bypass the Schengen agreement, which basically says that the country where a refugee comes on land for the first time must also proceed with the asylum procedures, which is not functioning because there are many EU members who don't want to have any refugees at all. So they try to bypass this with these hotspots, but that is a completely inhuman. If you look at the Frontex pushback operation in the Mediterranean, I mean, we are losing all morality as, I mean, we are supposed to be a continent with a humanist tradition, and I see that all of that is being forgotten, and that is the other concern. I think that the condoning of what has happened for so long is already, I think the image of Europe has completely, gone into a dive in the whole eyes of the global South. The countries are looking at Europe as a failed continent with an inhuman policy all the way around. And I really think that, apart from what I said about the immediate danger of a direct US-Russia engagement over Iran, which could happen, and this idea of escalating in the Ukraine situation is equally bringing us to the abyss. If you look at all of these things together, it is unfortunately my conviction that no partial solution can function. These partial solutions are very, very important if they are embedded in an overall new security architecture, like it was accomplished with the Peace of Westphalia, where also the war parties did agree on basic principles, like to take into account the interest of the other, in the interest of peace, to forgive all crimes which were committed by one or the other side. So there were these general principles, and then they were sitting down for 4 years to negotiate all the details, territorial claims, and other details. And I think that if one looks at what this proposal is in that context, it can have a very important positive role. But if you don't change the general attitude of the large powers involved, which is the United States, Russia, the European Union, China, and the BRICS, I don't see that this can function. So I would encourage, can we not discuss also how to make this proposal for a new security and development architecture really the focus of our organizing? And I find it a very encouraging sign that the Chinese Foreign Ministry issued something which is just expressed in different words, but concerning the content goes absolutely in the same direction.
If you had a response, Mossi Raz, please go ahead. Otherwise, we have a quick question.
Just very short one. I fully agree. I don't think that proposal of Mr. Dr. Nasser al-Kidwa and former Prime Minister Olmert is the only thing that we should do. It is not all this or the peace plan of Schiller Institute. It's them together. This is how I see that. And it is very important that it comes together from Israeli politician, not only a politician, a person who was prime minister, and a Palestinian politician, not only a politician, a person who was a foreign minister. So this is why I mentioned that. And for me, it gives a lot of hope. This is something new from the last weeks, and yesterday they met the Pope, and it is we try to promote it as we can. Of course, it's not that easy at that time. First, we have to end the war. I fully agree that we have to see what is going to be the future in Lebanon. More or less, I believe that we will have to go back to the Security Council Resolution 1701 that was kept for a decade by both sides, but in the last years was violated by Hezbollah. But I think that more or less we will have to go back to this resolution with some few changes. Thank you.
Thank you. And before you leave, Mossi Raz, we do have a question from a candidate in New York, congressional candidate, Jose Vega. Are you
hi.
there, Jose?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. But first of all, Mossi, thank you for your presentation and thank you for coming on here. Tensions are very high all over the world, especially in New York as well. And as a congressional candidate, I'm trying my best to have discussions of this that are productive and meaningful in some way that can allow us to elevate our minds beyond just simple side taking. Let's remember that Rabin was assassinated in November of 1995. And this will be the 30th anniversary of that. And that was not done by Hamas or Hezbollah or the Iranians. Leah Rabin, in an election held the spring after Rabin's November 1999 death, Netanyahu narrowly beat his replacement Shimon Peres and served as prime minister from 96 to 99. And Leah Rabin's letters sent to an old friend were written in the final months of Netanyahu's term. And they're being published for the first time in advance of the 14th anniversary of Yitzhak Rabin's death, which will be observed Thursday. Leah Rabin died in the year 2000. And so she wrote in November of 98, I pray that the days of this government are numbered. Benjamin Netanyahu is a corrupt individual, a contentious liar who is ruining everything that is good about our society. He is breaking it to bits, and in the future, we will have to rebuild it all over. And I think in this context, it has to be emphasized because there are people who like to say that everything is different when a leader gets killed. It happened with with Dr. King in America. It happened in Israel. But you don't abandon a principle because people kill you for believing it. That's the primary story of the Christian martyrs and the prophets of Israel, like Isaiah, many of whom were persecuted and murdered. Some years ago, the nonviolent demonstrations in Gaza were attacked and women were killed by IDF snipers. The Saudis called for a nonviolent movement in Gaza, but that can only be a movement for economic development and other controversial measures, such as the rollback of the settlements. Now, what is your response to that? What is it that I can? What do you respond to that, and how? And what can I bring with me back to people in New York?
I'm not sure that I understand the question. First, a small correction. It's going to be the 29th, not the 30th anniversary, but it's not that important. I fully agree with what Leah Rabin has wrote, and as you can guess, I'm not a supporter of Netanyahu. I never voted for him, and I will never vote. Yes, he's corrupted. Yes, he has. First time, by the way, he has an interest, personal interest, in the war, that the war will go on, and this is really a problem. But I want to be very frank with you. It is not only Netanyahu. Exactly like Israelis, many Israelis has a mistake when they think, okay, Sinwar is not with us, now it's going to be different. It's going to be the same, yes, more or less. The same is if one else is going to be elected instead of Netanyahu, because the majority right now in Israel and probably in Palestine the same. It's more difficult to check public opinion polls in Palestine. The majority now support the war. We saw that in nations that were participating in wars all over the history, that when you fight, people fight. They say the other side, yeah, he's the evil. And even wars that were, I will dare to say, more far away and more stupid than this one, because in this one people fight for their homes. Yes, in both sides, Palestine and Israel. They did not fly to Vietnam to fight there. Yes, so it's not going to be easy. But I do believe that if we have leaders that are going to mobilize us for such an agreement, then maybe we can have the majority of support. In 1973, October 6, the same, not October 7, but October 6, started the war between Syria, Egypt, and Israel. If you ask Israelis after a year, if they agree to peace treaty with Egypt in change for the occupied territories in Sinai Desert, 90% said no. But in 4 years, it became the reality because of leaders. Because the Egyptian President Sadat came to Israel, and the Israeli Prime Minister Begin agreed. And yes, you're right that we'll have to find settlements. First, we will have to deal with the Israeli settlements in the occupied territories. Of course, they are not legal on one hand. On the other hand, 700,000 people live there. So this is a fact on the ground that was, in a way, recognized by the Palestinians since the 2000 negotiations in Taba, when Abu Ammar, President Yasser Arafat, sent his delegation to Taba, and they initiated that to swap land between Israel and Palestine in make it easier to and then to dismantle less settlers. But we can find solutions, agreements for everything if we want. If we don't want, if we say the other side is the evil, I have to kill him, and this is what Israelis say right now, and Palestinians. Don't think that this is only Netanyahu. It is not only Netanyahu, unfortunately. But if we say only we want to kill the other side, okay, now we killed, The Palestinians killed 1,700 Israelis. The Israelis killed 42,000 Palestinians. Now what? We must end this circle, and we must find an agreement.
Thank you for that, Mossi Raz. No, I think it's important to underline what Helga Tsep-LaRouche had brought up, that we have to create a new system, which takes into account, the security of all nations on the planet, which includes Palestine, it includes Russia, it includes nations who are being, swiped off to the side, and we have to address that right now. I think that unless we start going into that direction, we are going to face thermonuclear World War III. I see people are putting in questions in the chat. This is a genocide that's happening in Gaza. I think that I can just assert that. And it's difficult for people to fathom how to create a true peace in this area when you have this horrible thing going on. I think we have to rise to the occasion to bring an end to all of this by creating this new system. And that takes a lot of courage on everyone's part, because there's many ideologies and many things combating people and preventing them from being able to do this. So anyway, I just want to emphasize that to people who are listening to this call right now. We're not going to create true peace if we don't have this dialogue process. It's just not going to happen. So anyway, thank you very much for joining us, Mossi Raz, for the discussion and dialogue. I know that for your faith, you have to get going very soon, but thank you very much for being on. Okay, so we are going to continue with our agenda, and we have let me pull this up. We have a video from Jeffrey Sachs, who is an American economist and public policy analyst and a professor at Columbia University. So let me just pull this up. I apologize. Make sure I am doing this correctly. Okay, share sound. And I want to thank Jeffrey Sachs for doing this interview with the Schiller Institute and for letting us use this for the IPC. So is everybody able to see this okay?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, I'll play it.
Well, look, basically, the students who were calling for justice for the Palestinians had the police called on them. That's it.
Yeah.
So they were arrested, and that happened last spring. That shuts down a lot of activity. The university took an extremely hard line. It forgot that it's a university. It forgot that it is a community of students and professors who are also not only an educational community, but a moral community. It forgot all of that because the police were basically called from the start. It was dreadful. And of course, administrators across the country are bullied and cowed by what Congress is doing. Not just Congress, by their own boards, their own donors, and so on. So the situation is that I'm very proud of our students. I'm very proud when they demonstrate. I think that universities also should respond to this by all sorts of lectures and workshops and discussions and debates and learning about the history and using the intellectual qualities of the university to help educate. And very little of that has happened. And it's really a disappointment.
We're going to have a special event on October 26th in Manhattan. If you're going to be back in New York, I encourage you to attend. We're getting a large hall. We're going to try to do sort of a shock effect conference with 1,000 or more people. It's going to be leading speakers of the sort that we've been having on our International Peace Coalition weekly meetings. But we're also going to have a classical music concert, classical music, including spirituals. which
sounds
as you
great.
know from
Yeah.
the great musicians like Marian Anderson and others, the spirituals are more than folk songs or something. They are classical in nature. They come from the heart and the mind. And so we'll be doing a number of spirituals. We'll probably also be doing a great Russian composition by Bortniansky from the 18th century, and other things. But the idea here is to sort of insist that a higher level of culture, and especially classical music, is essential if people are going to change the way they think. And you said before, we have to make people think in a different way. And this is the intent of that event. I'll send you material as we have it on that. Are you going to be back in New York?
No, I'll still be in Europe
okay.
traveling, so I'll miss that. But it sounds like a glorious occasion.
Yeah.
I watched, by the way, in 2017, 2018, when the G20 was hosted by Germany in Hamburg. Angela Merkel called for a concert for the leaders, and I happened to be sitting in the audience in a balcony just over the world leaders of the G20. And of course, the last piece on the score that evening, in the program that evening, was Beethoven's Ninth,
Right.
Ode to Joy, and you should have seen the faces of the world leaders, because even the most hardened, everyone just lit up because it's a universal language. If we could get a little Beethoven into this, a little bit of Ode to Joy and All Men Are Brothers, Ali mentioned, it does work. It touches the heart. So
No,
it's
absolutely.
a great idea. What we need is a change of mindset. We need a different approach. We need a different idea. We need the idea of collective security. We need the idea that we are trapped in this together. We're all on this planet. We are all extremely vulnerable to this escalation of war, and we need to reason our way through this before we get blown up. And this, I think, is the main point of all of this. So far, the U.S. isn't buying it. So far, the U.S. approach, and this is a deep issue, because if we step aside from the immediate issues of Israel and Palestine, there's a deeper problem, which is that the U.S. has been trying to run the world for decades, including how it acts in the Middle East, but it's what has gotten us into the Ukraine war. It's what's gotten us into countless wars in Vietnam, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Syria, in Libya, in Ukraine, and many others that I could list. And these are wars of choice that the U.S. security state has made, because the U.S. security state, really starting in 1945, by the way, but especially in hyperdrive, starting in 1991, said, we run the world and no one can tell us what to do. And of course, this is it's absurd on one level, but it's tragic at another level. It's completely delusional. The U.S. is 4.1% of the world population. How could we run the world? We're one country out of 193. How could we run the world? But this has been the U.S. attitude. And the U.S. deep state, the U.S. security state, views the UN, okay, sometimes it can be helpful, but sometimes it's a nuisance because it's trying to tell us what to do. And so the U.S. views the UN with a lot of disdain, actually, much of the time. Don't tell us. And we don't even need to ratify treaties that all the rest of the world has signed on, and so forth. This is very dangerous, this way of thinking. And it's increasingly out of touch with reality, because also what the United States deep state or security state has not noticed is that China's caught up. and other countries are catching up. And the U.S. is not so dominant in any sphere, in technology, in economy, in military power, that it can make this extraordinary claim that it's the sole superpower and it can do what it wants. So my point is we need to think this through better and then understand this has to change. Well, I think everyone needs to tell your respective governments everywhere, make peace. These are wars. Like, by the way, the war theorist von Clausewitz said when he wrote his magnum opus on war in the 1830s, war is the continuation of politics by other means or with other means. And so when you see war, think politics. When you look at the war in the Middle East, the politics there are that Israel has blocked a state of Palestine, and that's the way to peace. When you think about the war in Ukraine, the politics is that the United States insisted that Ukraine be in the U.S. military alliance rather than a neutral country, which would have kept Ukraine safe and which would make Ukraine safe when that proper position is taken. So all of these fights can be resolved through sensible politics, and yet we're in a warmongering era, and it's extremely important that our governments hear from us. They're not listening, they're not asking our opinions, but we should give them our opinions. We want peace, we want solutions to this, we want to avoid this very dire and very real nuclear threat above all. So I want to thank you, for what you're doing and for also the discussion we've just had. And the people everywhere should be working for peace.
So thank you again to Jeffrey Sachs for sharing this with us. You can catch the full interview on the Schiller Institute YouTube, and I definitely recommend it. It's very good. And with that, which he definitely brought up the cultural question, I'd like to have Diane Sayre, who, as you've heard over the last few meetings, she and Jose Vega were both candidates in New York, she being a Senate candidate, independent Senate candidate, and Jose Vega being an independent congressional candidate, are holding a large peace event where they're trying to bring 1,000+ people with a concert and many very excellent speakers who are going to be there. So we thought we'd bring her on to discuss the idea behind this intervention that they're making. Do we have you there, Diane?
I hope so. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Good. Well, I'm glad to be here, and I hope all of us can be here for quite a bit longer, which I think is a question in the current strategic situation. So as Anastasia said, Jose and I are the Lyndon LaRouche slate of candidates in New York, and we have combined to hold this event on the 26th at 2 o'clock. It will be live streamed and people can attend. Since it is a campaign event, just one caveat: you can only make the donation for a ticket if you're a U.S. citizen or permanent resident, but we're not excluding anyone. So if anyone here is in the U.S. and wants to attend, let us know. There are seats for observers. And it will be live streamed and available on Zoom with at least Spanish translation. The idea is that we have to somehow change the trajectory of the United States. And the American people have not cracked it. And while it is very important that people be out in the streets and very effective to intervene on congressmen and other representatives of this military, industrial, billionaire NATO fascist blob that's driving us toward war, the cultural question is really critical. And I say that because sometimes we have a misunderstanding of power. The adversaries of civilization truly have a misunderstanding of power because they believe that the way you change mankind is through brute force, as in Julius Caesar, you sticks, you blacks, that you just push someone along, you starve them to death, you torture them, you move them through fear, you move them through rage, and that then you are powerful. But what Schiller and the poets understood is that that is not actually what moves mankind. That is not where power lies. And in fact, the actual power is that which places one's identity in the future and the question of immortality, as Martin Luther King expressed so clearly in his last speech on the question of the mountaintop and the question of that longevity has its place, but I'm not worried about that now. And I think that the most I hate to use the word useful, but the way to access that is through classical music, and in particular the spirituals. Dawson, who was a very important arranger of spirituals in the classical tradition, which Dvorak pioneered in the United States and who directed the Tuskegee Institute chorus for many years, made the point that a lot of people see the spirituals as sorrow songs, that they were born of slavery, which in part is true. But he said, if you hear this music, you will never hear a word of rage or anger or resentment, even though the people who were enslaved were undergoing horrific torture and hardship. But because in the case of the United States and slavery, they also had a sense of a Christian faith and therefore identified their suffering with that of Christ's, which was transcendent, so that the music reflects the victory of one's spiritual identity over the physical hardship. And since the beginning of this slaughter in Gaza, it has been my sense that it is actually the power of the children of Gaza that can perhaps rekindle the conscience of people in the United States to change the way we have been acting, to change what we are willing to tolerate, and to change our thinking about how you actually move policy, how you move your fellow human beings, which LaRouche called the power of reason, but that people move in a powerful way when inspired, and they don't move that way when bludgeoned that way by force. So the combination in this event of the spirituals and also music from around the world, from Iran, from South Africa, from Russia, from other places, I think will demonstrate, will pull together a way of making this really sensuous and helping us to create the standpoint from which to leap beyond the elections, because I think the one thing we can surely say about November 5th is that, judging from the candidates other than myself and Jose, the election itself is not going to solve our problems, that we are going to have an emboldened, powerful movement that demands the right policy. So that's the idea of October 26th. And I would encourage everybody to put everything else aside that you're doing that day and be with us either in person in New York City or online, as it may be.
Thank you, Diane, for that. And I think this is a great opportunity for people to make that intervention with you and Jose and others and other people on the IPC. I included the link in the chat so people can go check it out. And if you're abroad, consider holding something similar in your area, holding an event where you bring many different people from your community into this process to have this dialogue and coordinate your activities. As people remember, we had our first chapter, which was created just a number of weeks ago, which I think is excellent. We could have more IPC chapters. Please just contact us and we can get that in motion. And we'll go from there. So anyway, thank you again, Diane. We are going to move on to the discussion period. I want to just make sure that people who are on the live stream know that if you'd like to be part of the discussion, you must be registered and be on via Zoom. So if you're on YouTube, you could find that link in the chat, or sorry, excuse me, in the description. Go into the description and you'll find the RSVP page there. If you are on somewhere else, whether that's radio, Twitter, what have you, you can go to the schillerinstitute.com website, and it's one of the first items on the website. And if you register, you'll get the Zoom link and you'll be able to participate with the different speakers that we've had on today. And with that, I'll tell the folks here to go ahead and cut the stream and we'll continue.